Samuel Mackenzie wiped the sweat from his forehead as he looked out over his sprawling cattle ranch. The Montana sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. 3 years had passed since he'd buried his parents in the small cemetery behind the old oak tree, and the silence of the ranch still felt heavy around him. At 32, Sam had grown used to talking to his cattle more than people. His nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and trips to town happened maybe once a month when supplies ran low. The loneliness hadn't bothered him much at first. After all, ranch work kept him busy from sunrise to sunset. There were fences to mend, cattle to move, and endless repairs on the old cabin his father had built 20 years ago. But lately something had changed. Maybe it was watching the sunset alone every evening, or eating dinner by himself at the wooden table his mother had loved so much. The empty chair across from him seemed to mock him with its silence. Even his old dog Rex had passed away last winter, leaving Sam truly alone on the 200 acres of land that had been in his family since 1869. The idea of finding a wife had come to him gradually. It started when he visited the general store in Copper Creek and saw other men with their families, children running around, wives chatting with neighbors, the warm chaos of family life that he'd forgotten existed. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, had noticed him watching and gently suggested he might want to consider settling down. "A man needs companionship, Samuel," she'd said kindly. "This frontier life is hard enough without facing it alone." That evening, Sam had sat in his cabin looking through old newspapers. In the back pages, between advertisements for farming equipment and patent medicines, he found what he was looking for. The matrimonial agencies promised to connect lonely men with respectable women seeking new lives in the West. It seemed like a practical solution to his problem. Writing the first letter had been harder than breaking a wild horse. Sam stared at the blank paper for an hour, unsure how to describe himself. What did a woman want to know about a cowboy? He wasn't educated like the men in the cities. He couldn't offer fancy restaurants or theater shows. All he had was his ranch, his honest work, and a genuine desire for companionship. Finally, he wrote simply about his life. He described the ranch, the beautiful Montana landscape, and his dreams of building something lasting. He mentioned that he was healthy, hardworking, and looking for a woman who wanted to share a simple but good life. He sealed the letter before he could change his mind and rode to town the next morning to mail it. The response came 3 weeks later, and Sam's hands actually shook as he opened the envelope. Eleanor Hartwell introduced herself as a 30-year-old widow from Ohio. Her husband had died in a factory accident 2 years ago, leaving her alone with no family and few prospects. She wrote about her love of cooking, her skill with a needle, and her dream of seeing the Western territories she'd only read about in books. Their correspondence began slowly. Eleanor's letters arrived every 2 weeks, and Sam found himself rushing to town whenever he thought the mail might have come. She wrote about her life in Ohio, the crowded city streets, and the factory smoke that made her long for clean air and open spaces. Sam shared stories about the ranch, the changing seasons, and the peaceful life they could build together. As the months passed, their letters became more personal. Eleanor confessed her fears about frontier life but expressed excitement about learning new skills. Sam admitted his loneliness and his hopes for children someday. They exchanged small gifts through the mail. Eleanor sent a hand-knitted scarf that Sam treasured, while he mailed her pressed wildflowers from the ranch and a photograph of the cabin where she would live. The decision to meet came naturally after 8 months of letters. Eleanor had saved enough money for the train journey west, and Sam had prepared everything for her arrival. He spent weeks fixing up the cabin, adding feminine touches he thought she might like. He bought new curtains from the catalog, painted the walls, and even built a small garden plot where she could grow vegetables and flowers. Sam practiced their first meeting over and over. He rehearsed what he would say when he saw her step off the stagecoach. He planned to tip his hat politely, help her with her bags, and welcome her to Montana with dignity and respect. The arrangement was practical, but Sam hoped it might grow into something deeper with time. The local townspeople had heard about Sam's mail-order bride, and Mrs. Henderson had offered to help Eleanor settle in if needed. Women need other women to talk to, she'd explained. Frontier life can be overwhelming for city folk. As October approached, Sam found himself counting down the days. He'd marked the calendar with a red X on the day Eleanor was supposed to arrive. October 15th, 1887. The date was burned into his memory. He cleaned the cabin one more time, made sure his best clothes were washed and pressed, and even got a haircut from the barber in town. The night before Eleanor's arrival, Sam barely slept. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what she would think of the ranch. Would she find it too isolated? Too primitive? He tried to be honest in his letters about the challenges of ranch life, but words couldn't capture the reality of living so far from civilization. He worried about other things too. What if they didn't get along in person? What if the spark he felt from her letters didn't exist face to face? Marriage was a serious commitment, and while Sam was ready for it, he knew Eleanor was taking an even bigger risk. She was leaving everything familiar behind to start over with a man she'd never met. Dawn came slowly, and Sam was already dressed and fed before the sun cleared the mountains. He saddled his best horse and rode toward town, his heart beating faster with each mile. Today would change everything. By evening, he wouldn't be alone anymore. The empty chair at his dinner table would finally have someone to fill it. The stage was due at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Sam arrived in town early. He paced nervously outside the general store, checking his pocket watch every few minutes. Other townspeople went about their business, but Sam could barely focus on anything except the road leading into Copper Creek. Mrs. Henderson came out to check on him around noon. "You look like you're about to jump out of your skin, Samuel," she said with a motherly smile. "Why don't you come in and have some coffee? The time will pass faster if you're not standing out here counting the minutes." But Sam couldn't sit still. This was the day that would determine his future. In just a few hours, Eleanor would step off that stage, and his life as a lonely cowboy would be over forever. He was ready for whatever came next, as long as it meant he wouldn't have to face the silent evenings alone anymore. The sound of approaching hooves and creaking wheels made Sam's heart race. He straightened his hat and brushed the dust off his best shirt one more time. This was it. After months of letters and dreaming, Eleanor was finally here. He walked toward the edge of town where the stagecoach always stopped, his boots clicking against the wooden sidewalk. The stagecoach rounded the corner, its 4 horses breathing hard from the long journey. Sam could see passengers inside through the dusty windows, but the afternoon sun made it hard to make out faces. The driver pulled the reins, and the coach came to a stop with a loud creak and a cloud of dust. "Copper Creek," the driver called. "Out, end of the line." Sam watched nervously as the door opened. The first person to step out was a middle-aged man in a business suit, clearly traveling on business. Then came an elderly woman who was met by what looked like her son. Sam's eyes stayed glued to the coach door, waiting for Eleanor to appear. What he saw next made his stomach drop. A woman stepped down, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came a stream of children. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids of different ages, all looking tired and dusty from the long journey. The woman was thin and worn-looking, with worry lines around her eyes that spoke of recent hardship. Sam blinked hard, thinking maybe the sun was playing tricks on him. But no, the children were real, and they were all looking around the small town with wide, uncertain eyes. The woman spotted Sam standing there and walked toward him with hesitant steps. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaky. "Are you Samuel Mackenzie?" Sam nodded slowly, still trying to process what he was seeing. "Yes, ma'am, I am. But I was expecting Eleanor Hartwell." The woman's face crumpled slightly. "My name is Martha Collins. I'm afraid Eleanor won't be coming. She got married last month to a banker in Denver. But, sir, I heard about your situation, and I was hoping maybe you could help us." Sam looked at the 7 children standing behind Martha. The oldest was a boy who looked about 14, tall and skinny, with dark hair falling into his eyes. Next to him stood a girl around 12, holding the hand of a little one who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. There were twin boys who looked to be about 10, another girl around 8, and a girl about 6 with pigtails. All of them wore clothes that had seen better days, and they all looked like they hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. "Help you, Hal?" Sam asked. Though he was starting to get a sinking feeling about where this conversation was heading, Martha took a deep breath. These children lost their parents in a house fire 6 months ago. Their father was my sister's husband, and their mother was my dear sister. I took them in, but my own husband died of tuberculosis 3 months ago. I've been trying to care for all of them, but I lost our house when I couldn't pay the rent. We've been staying in a boarding house, but the money ran out. Sam's head was spinning. "So you came here because—" "I heard about your arrangement with Eleanor from the lady at the matrimonial agency. When Eleanor told them she was getting married to someone else, they mentioned you were still looking for help on your ranch. I thought maybe you might need workers or know someone who does. These children are good workers, sir. They're not lazy or troublesome." The oldest boy, who Martha had called Tommy, stepped forward. "Sir, we don't eat much, and we can work hard. I know about horses and farming. We just need a place to stay until we can figure out what to do next." Sam looked at the boy's serious face and felt something twist in his chest. He'd never seen kids try so hard to look grown up and responsible. Behind Tommy, the little girl with pigtails was trying not to cry, while the smallest one was clutching a worn rag doll. "Where exactly were you planning to go?" Sam asked Martha. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used the last of our money for the train tickets. I was hoping once we got here, something would work out." "I know it. Sounds foolish, but I didn't know what else to do." Sam ran his hand through his hair. This was nothing like what he'd planned. He'd prepared for 1 woman, not 8 people. His cabin was small, meant for maybe 3 people at most. He barely had enough food supplies for himself, let alone a crowd. Winter was coming, and Montana winters were harsh enough to kill people who weren't properly prepared, but looking at these children, he couldn't just turn them away. The nearest town was 50 miles away, and they clearly had no money for another stagecoach ride. Night was coming, and the temperature would drop fast once the sun went down. "What are all your names?" Sam asked the children. The oldest boy answered first. "I'm Tommy, sir. This is my sister Clara." He pointed to the 12-year-old girl. "These are the twins, Jake and Jesse." The 2 10-year-old boys waved shyly. "That's Mary," he said, indicating the 8-year-old, "and Annie." The 6-year-old with pigtails managed a small smile. "The little one is Ruth." The 4-year-old was still clinging to her doll. Sam knelt down to be at eye level with little Ruth. "Hello there, sweetheart. That's a pretty doll you have." Ruth looked at him with big, serious eyes. "Her name is Molly. She's hungry." The simple words hit Sam harder than he expected. If the doll was hungry, the child certainly was too. He stood up and looked at Martha. "When did you all last have a proper meal?" "Yesterday morning," Martha said quietly. "We had some bread and a little cheese on the train." Sam made his decision. "All right, here's what we're going to do. You're all coming to my ranch tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Mr. Mackenzie, thank you. I promise we won't be any trouble. The children are well behaved, and I can cook and clean." "Can you ride horses?" Sam asked the group. Tommy nodded. "Yes, sir. We had a farm before the fire." "Good. The ranch is about an hour's ride from here. We'll need to get moving soon if we want to reach it before dark." Sam walked over to the livery stable and arranged for horses for everyone. The stable owner, old Pete, gave him a curious look when he asked for 8 horses instead of 2. "Expecting company, Sam?" Pete asked with a grin. "You could say that," Sam replied, not ready to explain the whole situation yet. As they prepared to leave town, Sam couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into. His quiet, orderly life had just been turned completely upside down. Instead of 1 woman to share his meals with, he now had 8 people depending on him. Instead of the peaceful courtship he'd imagined, he was suddenly responsible for 7 children and a widow with nowhere else to go. The ride to the ranch was quiet. except for the sound of horses' hooves and the occasional whispered conversation between the children. Sam kept looking back to make sure everyone was keeping up, especially little Ruth, who was riding with Clara. As they approached the ranch, Sam saw it through their eyes. The small cabin that had seemed cozy for 2 people now looked impossibly tiny for 9. The barn was sturdy but basic. The land was beautiful, but it was also isolated and wild. "It's not much," Sam said as they dismounted near the cabin. "It's perfect," Martha said, and she sounded like she meant it. Tommy looked around at the horses in the corral and the cattle in the distance. "It's a real ranch," he said with something like wonder in his voice. As they walked toward the cabin, Sam realized his life had just changed in ways he never could have imagined. The quiet evenings he'd been looking forward to sharing with Eleanor were gone. Instead, he was about to discover what it meant to have a house full of people who needed him. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out how to feed 8 extra mouths, where everyone would sleep, and what this arrangement would really mean. But tonight, he was just glad he could offer these children a warm place to stay and a hot meal. The adventure was just beginning. The first morning after the children arrived, Sam woke up to chaos. He'd spent the night on the floor of his own cabin, giving up his bed to Martha and the 3 youngest girls. The boys had slept in the barn, and Clara had made herself a spot near the fireplace. Sam's back ached from sleeping on hard wooden planks, and he could hear voices and movement throughout the small space. "Ruth, don't touch that," Clara whispered sharply. "I'm hungry," little Annie whined. "We're all hungry," came Tommy's voice from outside, "but we have to wait for Mr. Mackenzie to wake up." Sam sat up slowly, realizing that his simple morning routine of coffee and quiet reflection was gone forever, at least for now. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside to find Tommy already examining the horses in the corral. "You're up early," Sam said. "Always have been, sir. Pa used to say the early bird catches the worm." Tommy's face grew sad for a moment. "I was thinking maybe I could help with the morning chores." Sam nodded, grateful for the help but also wondering what kind of work a 14-year-old city boy could actually do on a ranch. "Sure, let's start with feeding the horses." Inside the cabin, Martha was trying to organize breakfast with what little food Sam had in his pantry. His supplies were meant to last 1 person for weeks, not feed 8 people for even a few days. The children sat quietly around the small table, their eyes following Martha's every movement as she stretched a few eggs and some leftover biscuits into something resembling a meal for everyone. "This won't be enough," Martha said quietly to Sam when he came back inside. "I know," Sam replied, looking at the children's thin faces. "I'll ride to town today and get more supplies." But that was just the beginning of their problems. The cabin had 1 small bedroom, a main living area, and a tiny kitchen. There was no privacy, barely enough chairs, and certainly not enough space for everyone to move around comfortably. The children were well behaved, but they were still children. They needed space to play, room to do their lessons and places to store their few belongings. The first week was a disaster of good intentions and complete inexperience. Sam had never lived with children before, and he had no idea how loud and busy they could be. Ruth cried every night for her parents. Annie asked 100 questions a day about everything she saw. The twins, Jake and Jesse, seemed to find trouble without even looking for it. On Tuesday, the twins accidentally let 3 chickens out of their coop while trying to collect eggs. It took Sam and Tommy an hour to catch them all. On Wednesday, little Annie wandered off toward the creek and scared everyone when they couldn't find her for 20 minutes. On Thursday, Mary tried to help with laundry and somehow managed to turn all of Sam's white shirts pink. Martha tried her best to keep everyone in line, but she was overwhelmed too. She'd never lived on a ranch before, and simple tasks like cooking on a wood stove instead of a city gas range left her frustrated and exhausted. The first time she tried to milk Sam's cow, the animal stepped on her foot and knocked over the bucket. "I don't know how to do any of this," Martha confessed to Sam one evening after a particularly difficult day. "In the city, we bought milk from the dairy and eggs from the market. I've never churned butter or preserved vegetables or any of the things a ranch woman needs to know." Sam felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He'd agreed to let them stay temporarily, but winter was coming fast. Even if Martha found work in town, there was nowhere for 8 people to live. The boarding house was full, and most families barely had room for their own children, let alone 7 extras. The situation came to a head during their second week together. Sam had been trying to repair a section of fence that the twins had accidentally damaged while playing. Clara was supposed to be watching the younger children, but Ruth had wandered into the kitchen and somehow knocked over a jar of preserved peaches. The sticky mess covered the floor, and when Annie came running to see what happened, she slipped and fell, cutting her knee on a piece of broken glass. Annie's crying brought everyone running. Martha tried to clean the wound while Clara held the little girl still, but Annie was scared and wouldn't stop screaming. Sam found himself in the middle of the chaos, not knowing how to help, feeling completely out of his depth. "This isn't working," he said finally, his voice louder than he intended. The cabin went silent. All the children stared at him with wide, frightened eyes. Martha's face went pale. "I'm sorry," Sam said quickly, realizing how harsh he'd sounded. "I didn't mean it like that. I just meant we need to figure out a better way to do things." But the damage was done. That night he overheard Tommy talking quietly to Clara. "We need to find somewhere else to go," Tommy whispered. "Mr. Mackenzie doesn't want us here. We're too much trouble." "But where can we go?" Clara whispered back. "Martha doesn't have any money and winter's coming." "I don't know, but we can't stay where we're not wanted." Sam lay on his makeshift bed on the floor, staring at the ceiling and feeling terrible. These children had already lost everything once. They'd been through more hardship than most adults ever faced. And here he was, making them feel unwanted again. The next morning, Sam made a decision. Instead of complaining about what wasn't working, he was going to start fixing things. He gathered everyone together after breakfast. "We need to have a family meeting," he said, and he saw the children exchange worried glances. "First," Sam continued, "I want everyone to know that you're welcome here. I know I got frustrated yesterday, and I'm sorry. This is new for all of us, and we're all still learning." Relief flooded the children's faces. "But we do need to make some changes if we're going to make this work. Tommy, you're good with horses. I want you to help me with the livestock every morning. Clara, you're clearly the best at managing the younger children. Martha, I know ranch life is different from city life, but you're already getting better at things like cooking on the wood stove." He turned to the twins. "Jake and Jesse, I know you two like to explore, but the ranch can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Instead of getting into trouble, how about I teach you about the different areas and what to watch out for?" The boys nodded eagerly. "Mary, you're careful and responsible. I think you'd be good at helping with the garden and learning to preserve food for winter. Annie, you ask good questions. That means you're smart and want to learn. And Ruth, you're the youngest, but even you can help by keeping your doll Molly company and staying close to Clara." For the first time since they'd arrived, Sam saw real hope in their faces. The changes didn't happen overnight, but they started to make a difference. Tommy proved to have a natural way with animals. The horses seemed to trust him immediately, and he learned ranch skills faster than Sam had expected. Clara organized the younger children like a military general, creating schedules for chores, lessons, and playtime. Martha began to find her rhythm in the kitchen. She learned to make hearty stews that could feed everyone, and she discovered she had a talent for baking bread in the old wood-fired oven. The children began to settle into routines, and the constant chaos started to feel more like the natural energy of a busy household. But the biggest challenge was still coming. October was ending, and November brought the first frost. Sam looked at his dwindling supplies and his overcrowded cabin, and he knew they couldn't continue the way they were. Something had to change, and soon. Winter in Montana was no joke. People died if they weren't properly prepared. Sam had to decide whether he was really ready to take responsibility for 8 people through the harsh months ahead, or whether he needed to find another solution before the snow started falling in earnest. The temporary arrangement had lasted 3 weeks. Soon, Sam would have to make a choice that would change all their lives forever. The first snow came earlier than expected, falling silently during the night and covering the ranch in a thick white blanket. Sam woke to an unusual quiet and knew immediately what had happened. When he looked outside, everything was transformed. The familiar landscape had become a winter wonderland, but Sam felt more worry than wonder. "Look at all the snow," Annie exclaimed, pressing her face against the window. The children were excited about the snow, but Sam and Martha exchanged concerned glances. They both knew what this meant. The roads to town would be difficult to travel, supplies would be harder to get, and they were committed to staying together until spring, whether they were ready or not. "Can we build a snowman?" Ruth asked, still clutching her worn doll. "After chores," Tommy said automatically. The boy had taken on so much responsibility that he sometimes sounded more like a parent than a teenager. Over the past month, Sam had watched Tommy grow from a scared, thin boy into someone who could handle real ranch work. The kid had a natural instinct for knowing what animals needed, and he never complained about getting up early or working late. More than once, Sam had caught himself feeling proud of Tommy's progress, as if he were his own son. "Tommy, you and I need to check on the cattle this morning," Sam said. "This much snow means we'll need to move them closer to the barn so we can feed them easier." "Yes, sir." "Should I saddle Thunder for you?" Thunder was Sam's favorite horse, but lately Tommy had been the one riding him most days. The horse had taken to the boy like they'd been partners for years. While the males handled the outdoor work, Martha had created her own routine inside the cabin. She'd figured out how to make the small space work for 8 people by organizing everything down to the smallest detail. Meals were planned days in advance, and every child had specific jobs that kept the household running smoothly. Clara had become Martha's right hand, managing the younger children with a combination of firmness and gentleness that reminded Sam of his own mother. She helped with lessons, settled arguments, and somehow knew exactly when someone needed extra attention or comfort. "Clara, can you help Mary with her reading while I start the bread?" Martha asked. "Of course." "Mary, bring your book over here." Sam had been amazed to discover that Martha had been teaching the children their letters and numbers every afternoon. She'd found some old books in the cabin and created lessons that kept them learning even though they couldn't attend the school in town. The twins, Jake and Jesse, had finally found their place on the ranch too. After several weeks of getting into trouble, they'd channeled their energy into useful work. They'd become experts at collecting eggs, feeding chickens, and keeping the firewood box full. They still got into mischief, but now it was the kind of harmless pranks that made everyone laugh instead of causing real problems. "Jake, Jesse, we need more wood for the fireplace," Martha called. "Race you to the woodpile," Jake shouted to his twin. "You're on," Jesse replied, and they both ran outside, competing to see who could bring in the most wood. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and even little Ruth had started giggling at their antics instead of crying for her parents all the time. But it was during the long winter evenings that Sam realized how much his life had truly changed. After dinner, when the chores were done and the dishes were cleaned, the family would gather around the fireplace. Someone would bring out a deck of cards, or Martha would mend clothes while the children played quiet games on cold nights. Sam found himself telling stories about his parents and the early days of the ranch. The children would listen with wide eyes as he described blizzards that lasted for weeks, wolves that came down from the mountains, and the time his father had to deliver a calf during a thunderstorm. "Tell us about the bear again," Annie would beg. "Which bear story do you want to hear?" Sam would ask, pretending he didn't know. She always wanted the same one. "The one where Grandpa Mackenzie scared away the bear with just a frying pan." Sam saw. Father had never been called Grandpa Mackenzie by anyone, but somehow hearing Annie say it felt right. The children had started referring to his parents that way naturally, as if they were claiming their place in the family history. In return, the children shared their own memories. Tommy talked about the farm where they'd lived before the fire and how his father had taught him to whittle. Clara remembered helping her mother with sewing, and she'd started teaching the younger girls the same skills. Even little Ruth would tell stories about her doll Molly and the adventures they'd had together. Martha, often sat quietly during these evening conversations, working on some mending or knitting project. But Sam noticed that the worried lines around her eyes had started to fade. She smiled more often, and her laughter had begun to sound genuine instead of forced. "Martha, you've gotten really good at making biscuits," Mary observed one morning. "Thank you, sweetie. I never thought I'd learn to cook on a wood stove, but I'm starting to enjoy it." Sam had noticed Martha's progress, too. She'd gone from burning everything to creating meals that made his mouth water. Her apple pie was even better than his mother's had been, though he'd never admit that out loud. The breakthrough moment came during a particularly fierce blizzard in December. The wind howled around the cabin for 3 days straight, and the snow piled up so high that they couldn't even open the front door. They were completely trapped inside the small space, and Sam worried that cabin fever would drive everyone crazy. Instead, something magical happened. The children invented games, told jokes, and found ways to entertain each other. Martha taught them songs from her childhood, and Clara showed everyone how to make paper dolls from old newspapers. Tommy carved wooden toys for the younger children, and even Sam found himself joining in a game of charades that had everyone laughing until their sides hurt. "This is the most fun I've had in years," Martha said on the second night of the storm. "Really?" Sam asked, surprised. "Even being stuck inside with all this chaos?" "Especially because of the chaos," Martha replied. "When my husband was alive, our house was so quiet. We never had children of our own, and I always wondered what it would be like to have a big family. Now I know." Sam realized he felt the same way. The loneliness that had driven him to seek a mail-order bride was completely gone. He woke up every morning to the sounds of family life, and he went to bed every night knowing that people cared whether he came home safely. "Sam, can I ask you something?" Tommy said one evening while they were checking on the horses. "Sure, son." The word son had slipped out naturally, and Sam didn't try to take it back. "Do you think we could stay here permanently? I mean, after winter ends?" Sam looked at the serious young man beside him. Tommy had grown taller over the past few months, and his shoulders had broadened from the ranch work. More importantly, he'd developed the kind of confidence that came from being needed and valued. "What would you think about that?" Sam asked. "I like it. We all would. This feels like home now, and you and Martha feel like real family. I know we're not your blood relatives, but blood doesn't make a family, Tommy. Love does. And caring about each other does. And showing up every day does." Tommy smiled, and Sam realized that somewhere along the way he'd stopped thinking of these children as temporary visitors. They'd become his family, and he couldn't imagine life without them. The winter that had started as a challenge had become the season when a group of strangers became a real family. By spring, Sam knew there would be no question about whether they'd stay together. They already belonged to each other. Spring arrived slowly in Montana, bringing with it the kind of hope that comes after surviving a hard winter together. The snow began to melt, revealing the green grass underneath, and the first wildflowers started pushing up through the soggy ground. Sam stood on his porch, watching Tommy and the twins working with the horses in the corral, and felt a contentment he'd never experienced before inside the cabin. He could hear Martha humming while she prepared breakfast, Clara helping the younger girls get dressed, and little Ruth talking to her doll about all the baby animals they'd see this spring. The sounds that had once seemed chaotic now felt like music to Sam's ears. "Pa, come look at this," Annie called from the garden patch. Sam's heart skipped a beat. Annie had started calling him Pa about a month ago, and it still caught him off guard every time. He walked over to see what had excited her so much. "The carrots are growing," she said proudly, pointing to tiny green shoots poking through the soil. "They sure are, sweetheart. Martha will be happy to see this." Over the winter, Martha had planned an ambitious garden for spring. She'd studied Sam's mother's old gardening books and made lists of what they could grow to help feed the family. The children had all been assigned different vegetables to care for, and they'd taken their responsibilities seriously. "Can we plant the beans today?" Mary asked, appearing beside them with a packet of seeds. "If the ground's warm enough," Sam replied. Tommy will know. He's gotten good at reading the soil. It was true. Tommy had developed an instinct for farming that impressed even old Pete from the livery stable in town. The boy could look at the sky and predict weather, feel the earth and know when it was ready for planting, and handle animals like he'd been. Born to ranch life, the peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Sam looked up to see two riders coming down the path toward the ranch. As they got closer, he recognized Sheriff Watson from town, but the other man was a stranger wearing a fancy suit that looked out of place in ranch country. "Sam Mackenzie?" the stranger called as they approached. "That's me," Sam replied, walking toward them. Behind him, he heard the cabin door open and Martha's footsteps on the porch. "I'm Mr. Harrison from Chicago," the man said, dismounting from his horse. "I'm here about the Collins children." Sam felt his stomach drop. He'd been dreading this moment for months, though he'd tried not to think about it. He glanced back at Martha, whose face had gone pale. "What about them?" Sam asked carefully. "I represent Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, the children's great-aunt. She's their closest living relative, and she wants to provide them with a proper home and education in Chicago." Tommy had stopped working with the horses and was walking closer, clearly sensing trouble. Clara appeared in the doorway with little Ruth in her arms, and the other children were gathering around, their faces filled with confusion and worry. "They have a home," Sam said firmly, "right here." Mr. Harrison looked around at the simple ranch with obvious disapproval. "Mr. Mackenzie, I'm sure you've done your best. But these children deserve better than this frontier life. Mrs. Whitfield can provide them with proper schooling, cultural advantages, and opportunities they'll never have." "Out here, what kind of opportunities?" Tommy asked, stepping up beside Sam. Mr. Harrison smiled condescendingly at the boy. "Well, son, you could learn a trade, perhaps work in one of Mrs. Whitfield's businesses. The girls could learn proper domestic skills and make good marriages someday." "I already know how to work," Tommy said proudly. "I can handle horses, manage cattle, fix fences, and run a ranch. And my sisters are learning everything they need to know from Martha." "These children aren't yours to decide for," Mr. Harrison said to Sam, his tone growing sharper. "Mrs. Whitfield has legal claim to them, and she's prepared to take them back to Chicago immediately." Sam felt anger rising in his chest, but before he could speak, Clara stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, where was this great-aunt when our parents died? Where was she when we were living in a boarding house with no money for food? Where was she during the coldest winter we've ever seen?" The little girl's dignified courage made Sam's heart swell with pride. "Clara's right," Martha said, finding her voice. "We've heard nothing from any relatives for almost a year. These children have built a life here." Mr. Harrison pulled out some official-looking papers. "Nevertheless, the law is clear. Mrs. Whitfield is their guardian now, and I have the authority to take them with me today." "No!" little Annie cried, running to Sam and wrapping her arms around his legs. "I don't want to go. This is my home." Ruth started crying, and Mary moved closer to Martha. The twins looked ready to run away into the mountains rather than go with this stranger. "You can't just take them," Sam said, his voice steady despite the fury he felt inside. "They're not property to be moved around." "Actually, Mr. Mackenzie, I can. But Mrs. Whitfield is a reasonable woman. She's prepared to make you an offer." Sheriff Watson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Sam could tell the lawman didn't like this situation any more than they did. "What kind of offer?" Martha asked. "Mrs. Whitfield will pay you and Mrs. Collins $500 for the trouble you've taken with the children. It's quite generous, considering you have no legal claim to them." The insult hit Sam like a physical blow. $500, as if the love they'd built over the winter could be bought and sold like cattle. "We don't want your money," Sam said. "We want our family." "Your family?" Mr. Harrison laughed. "Sir, you're not married to Mrs. Collins, and these aren't your children. You're just people who happen to take them in temporarily." That's when Sam realized what he had to do. The idea had been growing in his mind for weeks, but he'd been too scared to voice it. Now, facing the possibility of losing everyone he'd come to love, The fear seemed silly. Sam walked over to Martha and took her hands in his. "Martha Collins, will you marry me?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Sam, you don't have to do this just to keep the children." "I'm not doing it just for them," Sam said softly. "I'm doing it because I love you. I love all of you. This winter showed me what real family feels like, and I don't want to lose it." "I love you too," Martha whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The children erupted in cheers, and even little Ruth stopped crying to clap her hands. "That still doesn't give you legal guardianship of the children," Mr. Harrison said, though he looked less confident than before. "Actually, it might," Sheriff Watson spoke up for the first time. "If Mr. Mackenzie and Mrs. Collins are married, and they formally adopt the children, Mrs. Whitfield's claim becomes much weaker, especially since the children have been living here for months and clearly don't want to leave." Tommy stepped forward. "Again, sir, I'll be 15 next month. In Montana Territory, that's old enough to have a say in my own future. And I say I want to stay here with Sam and Martha. This is my family now." "Mine too," Clara said firmly. "And mine," the twins said together. Mr. Harrison looked around at the determined faces surrounding him and seemed to realize he was fighting a losing battle. "Mrs. Whitfield won't be pleased about this." Mrs. Whitfield should have thought about that before she waited a year to show any interest in these children, Sam said. "Sheriff, what do we need to do to make this legal?" "We can ride into town right now and get you married," Sheriff Watson said with a smile. "Judge Parker can perform the ceremony, and we can start the adoption papers at the same time." 2 hours later, Sam and Martha stood in Judge Parker's office, surrounded by 7 excited children, exchanging vows that felt more real and meaningful than any ceremony in a fancy church could have been. "Do you, Samuel Mackenzie, take Martha Collins to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Sam said, looking into Martha's eyes and seeing his future there. "Do you, Martha Collins, take Samuel Mackenzie to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Martha replied, her voice strong and sure. "By the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The children cheered as Sam and Martha kissed for the first time as a married couple. Little Ruth threw flower petals she'd picked on the way to town, and Tommy shook Sam's hand with the seriousness of a man welcoming a new brother. "Now," Judge Parker said with a grin, "let's make this family official." One by one, the adoption papers were signed. Tommy Mackenzie, Claire Mackenzie, Jake Mackenzie, Jesse Mackenzie, Mary Mackenzie, Annie Mackenzie, and Ruth Mackenzie. 7 children, who had lost everything now, had a new last name and a future filled with love. That evening, as they sat around their dinner table in their cabin that no longer felt too small, Sam looked at his family and marveled at how much his life had changed. He'd been waiting for a mail-order bride to fill the empty spaces in his life, but instead he'd found something better, a ready-made family that had chosen him just as much as he'd chosen them. "Pa," Annie said, "can we have cake tomorrow to celebrate?" "We can have cake every day if Martha's willing to make it," Sam replied. "Every day might be too much," Martha laughed. "But we can definitely celebrate." As the laughter filled the cabin, Sam realized that sometimes the best things in life come in packages you never expected. He thought he wanted quiet companionship, but what he'd really needed was the joyful chaos of a house full of love. The loner cowboy was gone forever, replaced by a husband and father who couldn't imagine life any other way.